When we think about the story of slavery in America, it's easy to assume it was just inevitable, like it was always destined to happen that way. But what if it wasn't? Today, we're going to uncover the forgotten story of the very first African-American families, and it's a story that shows American slavery wasn't a foregone conclusion at all. It was a deliberate creation. Okay, let's dive into this.
So our story really kicks off in 1619 with this kind of strange phrase from a colonial document, 20 and odd. It's talking about the first group of Africans who arrived in English North America. And here's the thing, they didn't arrive on a typical slave ship. No, they were actually captured from a Portuguese slaver and brought over on an English privateer. And what's so crucial to understand is that nobody really knew what their legal status was.
And that right there is the million-dollar question. See, English law back then didn't have a clear-cut category for lifelong hereditary slavery based on race. It just didn't exist yet. So were these people slaves for life? Or were they more like indentured servants who could one day earn their freedom? In that confusion, in that gray area, there's this tiny, fragile window of opportunity. And you won't believe it, but in that little window, some truly remarkable people figured out how to navigate this brand new system. They managed to secure not just their freedom, but also land, a little bit of wealth, and a real place in their communities. Let's meet some of them. Okay, so let's talk about a man named Anthony Johnson. He's probably the best example we have. He shows up in Virginia way back in 1621, and the records just list him as Antonio, a Negro. But after years of working as a servant, he doesn't just get his freedom, he gets married, has a family, and builds a really successful farm for himself. And to give you an idea of just how successful he was, get this. By the 1650s, Anthony Johnson owned 250 acres of land. I mean, that's a huge piece of land for anyone back then, white or black. He had cattle, and he even had his own indentured servants working for him. For all intents and purposes, he was living the life of a successful colonial planter.
And this is where things get really complex, and honestly, a little mind-bending. In 1655, Anthony Johnson actually goes to court and sues another black man, John Casor, demanding his service for life. And he wins. This is actually one of the very first times that lifelong slavery is legally recognized in Virginia, and it happened in a lawsuit between two men of African descent. It just shows you how much was still up in the air.
Now, it's important to know the Johnsons weren't alone in this. They weren't just some fluke. You had other families too, like the Tuckers. Their son William was baptized in the church, and the Pedros and the Paynes, who also owned land. For a brief moment in time, there was a real, small community of free, property-owning black families. But, as you can probably guess, this moment of possibility, it wasn't going to last. The colony was hungry for labor, and the success of families like the Johnsons actually started to make the powerful planter class nervous, so they decided to change the rules. Let's actually walk through how the walls started to close in piece by piece. Okay, so jump to 1640. This court case is a huge turning point. 3 indentured servants run away together. 2 are white, 1 is black. They all get caught. But here's the difference. The 2 white servants just get a few extra years added to their service. John Punch, the black servant, is sentenced to serve for the rest of his life. And boom, right there, it's one of the first times we see the law make a decision, a punishment, based purely on race. Then, in 1662, a new law comes along that is just devastating. It's a Latin phrase, partus sequitur ventrum. It basically means the offspring follows the womb. Or put simply, what the mother is, the child is. This one law almost single-handedly made slavery hereditary. If your mother was enslaved, you were automatically a slave for life. The door to freedom through birth was slammed shut. And from there, the laws just kept piling on, one after another. In 67, they decided that getting baptized wouldn't make you free anymore. Then in 82, a big law came down that basically said any non-Christian arriving by sea is a slave for life, which covered almost all Africans. You see what's happening? They're taking this gray area and, choice by choice, law by law, they are building a rigid system of racial slavery. There's nothing accidental about it. So, what about the Johnsons? The family that proved a different way was possible? Well, their story shows you exactly what these new laws meant for real people, and it is absolutely heartbreaking. Anthony and Mary could see the writing on the wall. They actually moved to Maryland, probably hoping for a better shot. But after they passed away, a court seized the land they had spent their entire lives building. And the court's reason for taking it? It's right here in this quote. They ruled that because the Johnsons were Negroes, they were legally considered aliens, which meant their own children had no right to inherit their property. Just like that, a lifetime of work gone. Legally wiped off the map.
So why does this story matter so much today? Why dig all this up? Because it completely shatters the idea that American slavery was just inevitable. It wasn't. It was the result of a series of very specific, very deliberate choices made by people in power.
I mean, think about the people we've met. You've got Anthony and Mary Johnson, who reached the absolute peak of what was possible only to have it all stripped away from their family. You've got little William Tucker, a symbol of a kind of integration that was quickly thrown away. And then there's John Kasor, whose own court case became a tragic stepping stone towards a system that would end up enslaving millions.
When you put it all together, the story of these first families is really a tragedy in two parts. First, you have the personal tragedy of these incredibly resilient people whose success was ultimately crushed. And then you have the much bigger tragedy of a society that saw a different path was possible and actively chose to turn away from it, to build its future on a foundation of racial bondage.
And that really leaves us with one big, haunting question, doesn't it? The lives of Anthony Johnson and these other families prove that the path America took wasn't the only one there was. It forces you to ask, if this path was deliberately chosen, what other paths were possible? What other kind of America could have been?